Welcome to the Bill Gephardt Show Podcast, where today we are exploring something you've heard about and maybe used, I suppose, ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, chatting with you to answer your questions and actually having conversations with you in case maybe you have a follow-up question or two. It's pretty amazing. But we're going to talk about ChatGPT in an area where the answers can be critically important, and I think sometimes a matter of life and death, and that is cancer questions and treatments, and some other health issues. And to do that, let's welcome to the podcast Dr. Skyler Johnson. He is an oncologist, a doctor at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, Department of Radiation Oncology. Welcome, Dr. Johnson. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, now you've been well known not just as a cancer doctor, but a guy who is very much into research and publishing. And you've done a study on artificial intelligence and cancer and how the AI, as it's called, communicates with people. What inspired that? And tell me about that.
Yeah, so I think throughout my professional career, I encounter patients on a regular basis, cancer patients who are in these critical stages of gathering information and making life and death decisions about how to approach their cancer treatment. And a lot of these patients, very understandably are in vulnerable situations. And sadly, there's been cases where patients have been misinformed by the cancer information that they're reading about online or hearing about from friends and family. And that has led to their early deaths. And this is something that has always stuck with me. And, I've also had these experiences personally where I've had family members diagnosed with cancer who encounter information online that may be less than reputable and not accurate. And they will often be confused as to what's accurate and what's inaccurate. So most of my research is focused on patients who may choose to use unproven cancer treatments or be influenced by false cancer information to make decisions that impacts their health. And so my goal with this type of research is to reduce human suffering caused by cancer. And the way that I've chose to do that is by improving the ability of cancer patients to access accurate information.
And here's the research. This is the research, some of the research pages, not all of it. I'm sure it's probably this thick or this thick. I don't know. But this is some of the preliminary stuff. And it seems to me what you did, correct me if I'm wrong, is you went into it's a Journal of the National Cancer Society. What was it?
The Journal of the National Cancer Institute.
Yeah. Now they have questions. Now you go in there yourself, by the way, everybody. You can go in there and there are questions and answers. And you ask some questions here. And then we have what the NCI answers were, and then what the ChatGPT answers were, just so we have some of the foundation of this. And what did you find?
So quite interestingly, when we compared the National Cancer Institute answers, which are accurate and factual, to the ChatGPT answers, it was clear that the ChatGPT answers were actually quite accurate, which was encouraging.
Wow.
And we were happy to see that these AI systems, these chatbots, were providing accurate information to cancer patients. So when we compare these, from multiple reviewers, it was very clear that the ChatGPT answers were accurate. But this comes with some caveats and some nuances that we feel like is important to keep in mind.
Well, the couple of things. Artificial intelligence is something that is supposed to learn from experience. And I don't know enough about ChatGPT. They call it artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence, is it really learning anything? Is it really making a mistake and then coming around and learning something? Or is it like Google, where if you ask it, do I have breast cancer? Do I have prostate cancer? It takes the word cancer and the word, and there might be some search engine optimization. So it has a tendency to go to certain websites. So I don't know if I were to put up a bunch of stuff on a website that purported to answer cancer questions for making money myself. I don't know if ChatGPT would go there.
Yeah, and
What do
it's
you
one of
think?
the things that we try to make clear as part of this research. These are common cancer myths and misconceptions that we were asking it. Things like, is cancer a death sentence? Does my attitude, positive or negative, impact my chance at a cure? Is cancer contagious? Can a biopsy spread my cancer? Does sugar feed my cancer? These are very common questions. And and ChatGPT answered these questions accurately, and it's because it's drawing on a wealth of information that exists online because these questions are so common that are accurate. Our concern is that if you were to ask it questions that were uncommon, unusual, or very oddly specific, that it's possible that this ChatGPT could provide inaccurate and potentially harmful information.
I wonder if the National Cancer Institute is merely credible. And what I mean by that is, could I put up something and fool the computer into thinking it's credible to get you to take my bogus cancer treatments and give me a lot of money? I guess that's what I worry about. I love this study, but I worry about humans when they're not hooked on to artificial intelligence. Does that concern you?
It does, and it's something that we actually mentioned in the paper, is that we need to be vigilant and we need to continually find ways to at least monitor some of this information so that our cancer patients aren't being misled by unscrupulous providers, we might call them. And so it's important that we stay vigilant. We just don't say, hey, ChatGPT looks good, and then ignore it. But we have to continually watch to make sure that it's providing accurate information for our cancer patients if they decide to go to that source.
I had cancer, and you know that because you're my cancer doctor, and I'm pretty much cancer free right now, which is wonderful. But when I first went to Huntsman and some other physicians to talk about this condition, it turns out, and this was a little different for me, in terms of how I was handled and what I was expected to take responsibility for as a cancer patient. So if I were to have a heart attack right now, the people around me would know what to do. They would call the ambulance, and who knows, I might be passed out on the floor, and they would take me to the hospital. But the doctors around the table would not say, geez, Bill, I don't know, what should we do here? Should we give you some oxygen maybe? Should we put a stent in there? What should we do? What do you think? Because I don't know a thing about that stuff. They would obviously do what they need to do. But when there was cancer involved, I was given books and pamphlets and papers and websites that were credible to go to because there were a number of alternatives to treat my cancer. And do we do that with all cancer patients, where I did ultimately make a decision? It turned out, I believe it was the right decision, but even making that decision, I was not absolutely certain with no medical training that it was the right answer.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is that we don't do that for all cancers. In some cancers, there's usually, or there can be, only one proven approach to cure that cancer or prevent it from progressing. In some cancers, like prostate cancer, for example, there are many right answers, but the right answer is dependent on the individual's personal values, preferences, goals for quality of life. So where two treatments have equal outcomes and chance of cure, we really focus then at that point on the potential side effects. And we have informed discussions with patients about what treatment option would be best for them.
And that's what I was worried about. No, I mean, I'm not worried about that anymore. That's done. I worry about that. All the websites I went to, ChatGPT was not really there. I did Google a few things and put in some keywords that searched for things. In Google, and this was before ChatGPT was readily available, I found some stuff that was just silly. And I found some stuff that I did not think was silly. And then talking to you, turns out it was silly. And I've also found out some really credible stuff. And with this new AI, I worry, and you do too, obviously, that there might not be an independent arbiter, if you will, of what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, and it's a real concern, despite having done this research and showing that the answers that ChatGPT puts out there are generally accurate. There was some differences between what you might find on a credible website like the NCI and the answers that ChatGPT put out.
Yeah.
And mainly what was commented on by the reviewers who were blinded to the NCI answers and the ChatGPT answers were that the ChatGPT answers were a little bit more vague. They used a little bit more hedgy language that was less definitive that you might find from a website like the NCI. And so your concerns are valid. I think that it's something that we obviously have to watch very closely as the AI systems evolve and continue to draw on the vast amount of credible and non-credible information that exists online.
Let me try one of these questions. I don't know if you have this in front of you there, but this is, let me try the NCI, National Cancer Institute answer versus the ChatGPT answer on, can cancer surgery or a tumor biopsy cause cancer to spread in the body? Did someone voice that into a microphone that went into ChatGPT, or did you type that in?
So it was typed in as
Okay.
part of, yep.
So it says the NCI answer begins, the chance that surgery will cause cancer to spread to other parts of the body is extremely low. The first sentence of the ChatGPT is, in most cases, cancer surgery or a tumor biopsy will not cause cancer to spread in the body. That's pretty much the same answer, huh?
Yeah, and they're very close. You know, the one thing that you might notice between the two answers is that the ChatGPT answer is much longer. You can use prompts to shorten answers.
ChatGPT and
but the answers, are very similar. There's some subtle differences, but contextually they're the same.
It can tell, you mean in what they actually tell you? That's what you mean by in context. They're virtually the same.
Correct.
I never heard this. Will cancer get worse if exposed to air? Well, how do you expose cancer to air? I guess if it was skin cancer, but other than that, what do we mean? I've never heard that question before.
Well, that's a common question that patients actually have. And we often will hear it in spaces like breast cancer, where the common, one of the common treatments is to remove the tumor with surgery. And the concern is, and again, this is a concern that's arisen from people on the internet saying that this is what happens if you let a doctor do surgery on you. And the NCI answers and ChatGPT answers are, again, very similar and state very clearly that no, exposure to air does not make a tumor grow faster or cause it to spread to other parts of the body.
You're right about the contextual answer, because on the NCI, National Cancer Institute, the first sentence is no, period. Will cancer get worse if exposed to air? The answer is no. Over on ChatGPT, it doesn't start that way. It says exposing cancer to air will not cause it to get worse, which is the same as no, but it's a little bit more equivocal, I guess, isn't it? Isn't that what?
Yeah,
was that your point?
And that's what the reviewers noted about the ChatGPT answers, is that commonly they gave answers that were not as definitive, they weren't quite as clear or concise, and they used this hedging type language in their answers that gave some of the reviewers pause in terms of, could a person reading this potentially interpret it as being less definitive or sure as the NCI answers.
So are you recommending this? Is it based on not you personally, yes, but are you recommending this to use what we're calling artificial intelligence, ChatGPT? Look, you got to go see your doctor, and some people are more prone to go see their oncologist on cancer doctor than others. So what is your recommendation on this?
Yeah, so my general recommendations based on this research have not necessarily changed. I'm not advising people to go to ChatGPT at this point. I'm still advising my patients that if they would like to go online and search diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment options about their cancer, that they should go to reputable websites. And those are typically websites that end in .edu, .org, or even in some cases .gov. And so when I'm making these recommendations, depending on the cancer type, I will tell the patients websites that I prefer that they go to. But I think that this research is important because it tells us that those patients who are going to ChatGPT may actually not be encountering misinformation, which is a good thing. And so it might just be that I don't advise against it.
I see. Where can I find this thing? Is it published yet, this study?
So the study is soon to be published. It's currently under embargo, but I'm guessing that when patients hear this interview, the embargo will have just ended and that it will be released. Patients can go to JNCI. So it's a sister journal of JNCI called the Cancer Spectrum. So JNCI Cancer Spectrum, and they can read the article there.
Well, I think congratulations, and I think I get a kick out of the fact that you keep doing this stuff. I love it. All right, now when we come back, I want to talk to Dr. Skyler Johnson about his other studies related to some of this stuff, and I think maybe debunking cancer misinformation and bogus cures in general. We'll be right back. Our podcast brought to you by these sponsors of local journalism. Legacy Roofing, Utah's very first Tesla-trained and certified roofing company. For transparent, upfront pricing on all your roofing needs, contact Josh Carrion and his team at legacyroofingyutah.com. All Utah Plumbing, Heating, and Air, where boss John Holland has advice on how to keep your basement from flooding this spring as our record snowpack begins to melt. You'll hear from John straight ahead in this podcast. The law office of Brad DeBry, with over 25 years of auto accident expertise. Request your free consultation at braddebry.com. Stauffer's Towing. Hear why cops and clients call them Utah's most honest towing service. When you need a tow, you can always ask for Stauffer's. And iSmart Payments, where owner Greg Capitan tells us how he saves businesses big time on their credit card processing fees, cutting costs by up to 90%. You'll hear how he does it next. Let me tell you something about credit cards I've learned as a small business owner. The fees, monthly fees, they're an absolute pain. But I found a solution. It's in the form of a company called iSmart Payments. And the owner of that company is Greg Capitan, who joins us now. Hi, Greg.
Hello, Bill, and a happy sunny finally day to you.
Well, we'll see. Okay. Now, when I started this business, I went the easy way. I did pretty much zero research when I started the business, and I went to a bank, a major large bank, and they became my merchant bank. They're the ones that started processing my credit cards. And the monthly fees for credit card charges make me sick. Maybe it's I didn't even think that there are alternatives, because then along comes iSmart Payments, and it's about half price. How do you do that?
Right. That's a great question. And I'm so glad that you asked. A lot of business owners, they go to the bank, they feel the warm and fuzzies for their merchant services. And that is not a bad path. However, when you look at the fees associated, banks are in the business to make money, of course, but they.
Oh, so are you.
And so am I. Thank you.
There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with that, but you're doing it for half price.
That is correct. And that is because we are cutting out the middleman. Banks often use a processor in between them and you being the business owner. Well, why not go directly with the processor and cut all those extra fees out? And that's what we do.
And so there is there's a financial institution of some sort behind you, right?
Absolutely. So the processor that we use is called North American Bank Card, and they process for some well-known businesses. I guess I can rattle off a few. One is called Starbucks. Another one is called KFC and Honda Motors, to just name a few.
And so you're a guy who hooked up with them, and then you go out and you find people like me as a small business. And then I remember what you told me, that you can do it for less. And I figured you could, but I had no idea it would be that much less on monthly fees. So what is it you tell people?
Right. So we tell people that it's often how you set the account up. So for instance, I'm an outside rep with the connection. So they not only have me on the local level here in Utah or elsewhere,
Yeah.
but they also have 1-800 support and the company. So what I do is I make sure that the account is set up correctly. There's so many different ways to set up a merchant account. And if it's set up incorrectly, the cards will come in as either non-qualified or end up with a higher rate because the processing fee on the back end is not working correctly, so to speak, with how we set up the account or how others have set up the account. So I make sure it's set up correctly so the fees come in a lot lower, and that's what we do.
So is it going to be different for me going through you than somebody else? What will make the difference in I guess percentage of whatever you're charging a credit card? Would it be a different percentage for me as opposed to someone else?
That's a great question, Bill, and I'm glad that you're asked. So for instance, certain accounts like yourself, they will take the card information down and then key it into a terminal, a secure payment system. That is called a MOTO, mail order telephone order. And that way, when the account is set up, it is set up that way so the cards don't downgrade. If the cards don't downgrade, the risk goes up and the processing fees go up. Inadvertently, a bank or another institution will make more money there, but it's not set in their best interest because when it's set up correctly, the fees come in lower and the merchant is just a lot happier.
Well, you're looking at one, because somehow I've been spending a lot of double, roughly, for more than a decade with my small business. And then along comes you. And I don't know. It's just, the reason you're here is because I think other businesses need to know about this.
And that is true. Many of them, they'll hear maybe solicitations in this direction and or a similar message, and it almost becomes white noise because someone hasn't really taken the time to break it down and understand it.
That's
so
true.
For instance, if I may talk just briefly about the Durbin Amendment, that came along quite a few years ago. That one can do some research on that, and that is when you put in your PIN and you're using a card reader, you use the PIN-based debit, it is one of the most secure transactions out there. So the risk, the higher the risk, the higher the rate. The lower the risk, the lower the rate. And with PIN-based debit, gosh, we have transactions coming through at 0.39%.
Wow.
When it's face-to-face and they use their PIN. Such is the case with Walmart. When you go to Walmart or any other big institution and you put in your PIN, they ask, oh, well, do you want cash back? Well, the reason why they're giving them cash back is because the PIN is entered in. It's a one-way transaction. It cannot be back charged and it's super secure. So big corporations like Walmart and others, they feel it's okay, and it is okay to give cash back. So it's a very secure transaction. So going along with lowering rates is all about how you set the account up. And that's what I do as an outside rep. I go out there, kind of meet with the owner. If they're not available, I could do it on the phone. I have a fair amount of questions that I ask, and I set the account up correctly so the rates are lower.
Good. Well, it's working for me. And I want to have you back on here again to remind people of this eventually. Greg Capitan, iSmart Payments. What's your website?
Sure. You just said it, but I'll say it again. iSmartPayments.com.
The letter I,
Smart.
a dash or
No.
no dash? Okay. iSmartPayments.com. And that's how we get in touch with you.
Absolutely. All together. Yes.
All right. Greg Capitan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill. It was great to be here.
Welcome back to the Bill Gephardt Show podcast. We're talking with Dr. Skyler Johnson. He's an oncologist. He was my oncologist for prostate cancer out at the University of Utah, the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And he not only treats cancer and puts people at ease like me, but he also does a lot of studies, and he's been doing them over the years. And I want to talk to you about the study you did, I think it was back in the 90s, about debunking cancer information and bogus cancer cures in general. What was that about?
So we did a couple of studies actually, and there was a series of companion studies that showed that patients who use unproven cancer treatments, those cancer treatments that are not supported by scientific evidence, are up to a 5-fold increased risk of dying when they make that decision compared to those patients who use the recommended conventional cancer therapies that an oncologist like me might recommend. In follow-up to those studies, in our conversations with patients and journalists and other physicians, it became clear that social media was presumed to be a primary driver of some of the misinformation that cancer patients were receiving about these types of treatments. And so we studied the prevalence of cancer misinformation found on social media and demonstrated that 1/3 of every cancer article found on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and others is misinformation. And the vast majority of those contain the potential to harm a person. So this was alarming, obviously, because I know a lot of patients are on social media and get information from that source. So it became very clear that this was an issue that we need to help address.
And how do we know the difference between what's right and what's wrong and what might be in the middle? Like in your more recent study, it was a question of will supplements help to treat cancer or ward off cancer? And I see that stuff also on the internet, but what do you have to say about all that stuff? What is right and how do I know the difference? What's right and what's wrong?
Well, I think the important thing here is that physicians recognize that it's incredibly difficult for patients to know what's accurate information and what's inaccurate information. I have a personal experience where when I was in medical school, my wife was diagnosed with a Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she's doing great now. But at the time, even though I had some medical training under my belt, we did what most people, what I presume most people do, is we went online and we Googled treatments and prognosis and all of this stuff. And I was shocked even then to see how much misinformation existed online. But not only that, I think the most shocking part of it is that not only did I recognize that there was some misinformation there, but I recognized how reputable it appeared. And so at that time, it was an important lesson for me to see that patients are encountering this type of stuff. They may or may not have the medical background, but even if they do, it's difficult to know what's accurate and what's inaccurate. And so I advise patients today to do exactly what we did then. And we relied in part on those who did have the expertise to help us determine what is accurate and what is inaccurate information. And those in this situation are typically board certified physicians who have training explicitly in the area of cancer.
You know where it gets really goofy? And this is before social media and before the internet. And that was back in the 70s. Late 70s, I remember Laetrile. It was the substance that came from, I think, almond peach pits or almond pits or something.
Apricot pits, yep.
Apricot pits, that's what it was, apricot pits. And there were people who had MD, at the end of their names. I don't know if they were cancer doctors, but they had MD at the end of their names. I don't know if they just put it on there for the fun of it. And veterinarians and others that were swearing by this stuff, that there was that they claimed to have before and after. Before there was cancer, Laetrile treatment, no cancer. And that turns out to be complete nonsense, right?
Yeah, and it's concerning because not only is it making claims of effectiveness where no data suggests that that's true, I mean, absolutely none, but there's potential for harm when patients do those things. And we
Oh
see this
my God, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So that substance, the apricot pit, in high doses, which is what is generally recommended for patients with cancer from these unscrupulous providers, is something that is converted into the equivalent of cyanide.
Oh,
And
really?
we know that that is poisonous. And there are actually scientific reports of patients. One that I'm thinking of recently, of a prostate cancer patient who was taking a lot of these apricot pits and developed cyanide poisoning from that treatment.
Well, we had that during COVID too, sort of. I mean, it was the ivermectin, the horse. It's actually a treatment that gets rid of parasites, which has nothing to do with a virus, and I don't think anything to do with a bacteria, which had something to do with COVID. So it was the same type of thing, where we had the president of the United States saying that there was something to ivermectin. And then we had doctors saying that no, that's not no ivermectin. That's for horses, and it has nothing to do even for horses with COVID. And then we have the president, and well, I don't know if it's the president, but we had his people saying that anybody who says otherwise is wrong. Makes it difficult for the average person like me to understand what's right and what's wrong.
Right, and it is really difficult. And I mean, I empathize with people who have difficulty determining, what's right and what's wrong out there, because there is so much information coming at people from all different directions. One of the really challenging aspects of science that needs to be understood is that there are situations where we don't know, and in those cases where there's some uncertainty, we don't like to make strong recommendations one way or the other, which was true in the early situation with COVID and something like ivermectin. But then once the studies are completed and they show no benefit, in those situations we become more certain, and we can say with much more clarity, this doesn't work. And this happens in cancer as well, right? People will come up with a new treatment that I've never even heard of. A recent one was blue scorpion venom, which is new for me.
Oh yeah.
Doing this.
Oh yeah, I use that myself. I use that. I put it on my breakfast cereal. Blue scorpion venom.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, I've been doing this for years, and there's always something that new. And I have to be honest with patients, and it's that I don't know of any data that supports that. I have concerns that there's potential risk. But the other thing to be aware of is that there are other situations where we've actually done the studies on some of these treatments, like vitamin C or shark cartilage, or some of these other treatments that you might hear out there as being effective treatments for cancer, and they've shown no benefit. The really interesting thing that I think a lot of people want to believe, or at least are persuaded to believe, is that doctors are in the pockets of big pharma, and therefore we do big pharma's bidding. But the reality is that a lot of the cancer treatments that we use are sourced from original natural therapies. Some of the backbone chemotherapies that we use for breast cancer, for example, come from plant-based medicines that we have now used to amplify to treat cancer. And it's not that they were plant-based and so we didn't think that they would work, or we didn't want them to work. We wanted them to work, and when they were proven to work, they became medicine. They became the chemotherapy that we use. So there's no bias there against natural remedies or pharmaceutical remedies or anything like that. It's just that we want to see that it works before we recommend it to patients.
You make a very good point, because anything that we use on Earth came from Earth. So is it natural? Was it manufactured from something natural? Was it broken down in a laboratory? I mean, I suppose you could give me many examples, I'll bet, on things like anesthesia and some other things, and they would come from the venom of a scorpion or of a rattlesnake, or some of these things are developed that way, right? They actually come from stuff. Yeah.
We use certain therapies in cancer that come from a sea squirt. So we use these types of therapies, and it doesn't matter to me whether it comes from a sea squirt or whether it's made in a lab. What's important to me is that it is effective, and that we can do it with as little side effect as possible and maintain quality of life in patients, because and
it needs to be studied. I think that's probably the key. You need to have double-blind studies on all these things we hear about, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you really have to study. And I talk to patients about therapies all of the time. One of the interesting things that I like to bring up when you talk about whether a therapy might be effective or ineffective, or you're talking about natural therapies and
Yes.
whether natural is good, is that natural is not actually always good. You know, in the case of the apricot seeds, they can convert to poison. Bananas have potassium. We think potassium is being something that's great, but little do people know that when you use high doses of potassium, it can kill a person. And in fact, high doses of potassium are how you do lethal injections in prison systems.
That's true enough.
And so natural is not always healthy. It's the dose that makes the poison. And we have to study these things to know that they are safe and that they are effective. Otherwise, the answer is we don't know.
Speaking of safe and effective and all that other stuff, when we come back, I want to focus on what got us started here. And that's the most recent paper that's getting published that you and your colleagues put together on artificial intelligence and answers to questions. But I want to what will this do for the whole field of medicine? We're with Dr. Skyler Johnson, assistant professor at the University of Utah School of Medicine, and a doctor, an oncologist at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. We'll be right back.
You didn't plan on a disaster, but you have a choice on who restores it. Choose the best. Tell your insurance provider you choose UDK.
Okay, it looks like the snow has stopped for the most part for the winter, and we've had quite a winter, and the Great Salt Lake is up at least 3 feet above where it was, and it all has to do with all the snow and precipitation we've been receiving over the past few months. That's the good news, but the bad news is it's getting warmer and warmer. I don't know if that's bad news. That's probably good news in and of itself, but with all this the snow, what about flooding? And I've asked to come on board to talk to us about that today, John Holland. He is the owner of All Utah Plumbing, Heating, and Air. Hi, John.
Good morning.
Well, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about flooding, and I want to talk about preparing for flooding. And you as a plumber have something to say about that. And the other thing is, John, you're a big do-it-yourself guy. You're a guy who says, let's do it yourself. Here's how to do it yourself. And if you need some extra help, that's what you're here for. But tell me a little bit at All Utah Plumbing, Heating, and Air, what you guys are thinking about when it comes to preparations for flooding.
Right. So the things to think about, not to bore everyone, but yeah, we have so much snow and it's all going to melt. And so hopefully we don't flood like back in 1983. But
well, that's when the water came all the way up on the roads in Salt Lake. But, just in terms of flooding, even if it doesn't come up there, just because there's so much water.
Correct. So the way it works is the water that you can see. Well, the ground gets so saturated, and there's many places throughout the valley of just Salt Lake Valley, but up and down the whole type of Wasatch Front. There's certain areas, low spots, that's that down by the Jordan River, things like that. That's kind of common sense, but there are some other areas that they have high water tables. Well, all that water, as it's soaking into the ground, and our creeks and rivers and whatnot are trying to take the water as best as it can, but it also raises the groundwater itself. And that's when it can enter our homes right through the foundation. Yeah. Because our foundations are not fully sealed.
Most of them, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. And so a lot of concrete cracks. And so that's normal. And so in your basement, if you have a basement, well, the water can come right through those cracks. And so
what do we do for that?
So the solution is getting a sump pump. And so in preparation, to answer your question, you can call city, things like that, and say, hey, am I in a high water table area? West Bountiful is, things like that. So if you don't know, make that call. The next is, ooh, I don't have a sump pump. Maybe it would be a good idea to get going on it sooner and get a sump pump installed or sump pump system. That's two different things where you have a sump pump, but you also trench the basement out around the edges.
I was going to ask if I don't have a sump pump now, it's likely I don't have a basin or a trench or whatever. Do I have to have one or just put the sump down there?
Yes, you need to install a minimum a sump pump in a basement below the footing. So yes, you need to break the concrete, put that in, and it's got holes in it, so the water will go to that. Now that's hoping that the water goes to it. A really awesome way to do it is then you trench around the edges and actually grade pipe that can collect the water and take it to that sump and then pump it out of your house. It is not allowed to pump into the sewer system. That is not allowed. You have to take it out to another sump that you put in. We can do that, or
that's right,
or to the curb.
Well, yeah, if I got to dig up concrete or etch concrete or whatever I've got to do, that's probably not something I'm going to do myself. And, and with all this drought, many of us probably have sump pumps that we haven't used in a while. I wonder if they're working.
Exactly. So that's the next place I was going to go. If you had or have had a sump pump, you've kind of ignored it because it's been all these years. It's there, It's never ever. So it'd be a good idea to have it checked. You can check it yourself, or some water down there, or pull it out. It's not hard to undo it, pull it out. The pipe's connected to it, pull it out, and maybe take it outside or not, but bucket of water, put it in the bucket of water and see if it actually pumps. And then you're like, oh, good, my pump works. That's great. And then you just go put it back in. We can check it as well. We can fake it and stuff like that. Sometimes it'll have a float on it. The reason, so you can pull it up, the float, and that it'll indicate that the water, has come up. And so you pull it up and then you'll hear the motor go. The unfortunate part is, okay, the motor went, but can it pump? Is it still functioning correctly to pump? Because I've had many of them turn on, but actually it's not pumping anything. So having it checked is key. Yourself or I, or one of us, can come out and check it and go, hey, you're in good shape,
Okay. All right.
And then anyway, so you got it. And so that would be awesome that, hey, you did that, and you can, I never want to use the word rest assured, but your chances of flooding are way less.
All right, John Holland, owner of All Utah Plumbing, Heating, and Air. Normally, we're not talking about flooding. We're talking about air conditioning preparations with you this time of year. Real briefly, air conditioner prep.
Yeah, so air conditioning, if you do it yourself, you want to go outside, rinse the unit off with just water. There's nothing wrong with that. Just wash it off. I've got videos on that on my website. And
website is?
And it's allutahplumbing.com.
Mm-hmm.
And at any rate, so you can rinse it off yourself, then go inside, change your furnace filter, because remember, they work together, and make sure your registers in your home are all open. That way it can get a full airflow. We do a more extensive job really quick, I'll tell you. So right now we have a special for $69. We'll come out and do a full component and safety inspection of the system, and if it needs something, we'll let you know. And we check the components, and that's what we do. You're messing with 220 volt power, so you might want me to look at it.
Okay. All right. John Holland, the owner of All Utah Plumbing, Heating, and Air. The website, once again,
allutahplumbing.com.
allutahplumbing.com. John Holland, we were talking about spring flooding and air conditioning prep, and we'll talk again in a couple of weeks about a whole bunch of other stuff.
All right. Sounds great.
We're talking with Dr. Skyler Johnson, an oncologist at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, about of paper and that he's done, and artificial intelligence is the latest one, and can it answer your cancer questions? But in all this stuff we've been talking to, I want to talk a little bit about tourism. That is medical tourism, people leaving the United States. I mean, this podcast will be heard around the world, But I want to talk just about the chauvinisticness, I guess, of people leaving the United States and going elsewhere for treatment. Mexico, Canada, Singapore, for various things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a reason that people are traveling abroad, and it's because the places where they are traveling do not have protective regulations to prevent vulnerable cancer patients from being taken advantage of. And, sadly, patients will go to Germany or Mexico or some of these countries where there are lax restrictions, and they will pay for expensive treatments out of pocket. And that's of concern for us. In fact, it's what led us to complete a study on this very topic of medical tourism for cancer treatments to countries like Mexico. And we just published this study in January of this year. So it's about 2 months old.
Where's it published?
This study is published in Cancer Medicine. It's an open access article, so anybody who's listening today can go to Cancer Medicine, search
.com, cancermedicine.com.
Well, you could just Google cancer medicine and then international medical tourism of U.S. cancer patients, and the article will show up. My name is the last name on the list of the authors.
Johnson.
Skyler Johnson, and the first author is John Peterson, who's a oncologist as well.
And I guess there's the ongoing frustration again of who do you believe and who do you trust in the general public? Because some of the medications that I have taken and some of the medications that have been taken by members of my family are available for a fraction of the cost elsewhere. And you get the same old warning from the American Medical Association. Well, just make sure, because they're not backed up. They're not, and there's no enforcement mechanism. I mean, we just heard the story not long ago about the Eli Lilly company, who, in my opinion, been gouging us for life-saving and life-necessary insulin, have now decided, after great pressure, to bring it down to a maximum of $35 per month. In the meantime, people have been going overseas to get insulin for themselves and for their pets and for other things, and it's perfectly good insulin. And who knows, maybe there's a story or two of down insulin and these other medicines. And so we balance you, a person for whom I have a great deal of credibility, and Huntsman Cancer Institute, quite frankly. But I don't always know to call you, and I'm not sure you're always available to take my general call, or Huntsman, although Huntsman probably would, generally speaking, to find out what's right and what's wrong when I do medical tourism.
Yeah, and we have to, I think, I recognize that this is a major issue. A lot of the costs that go into the research and development of new medications are, I think the word that is worth using here is extracted from resource-rich environments like the United States and other countries where they charge an exorbitant amount for these medications. And it is a major challenge for people who are in resource-limited situations where they can get it cheaper. The difference between what we studied in this study— just
in Canada, even.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say, the differences between what we're studying and suggesting here and those situations is that people are going overseas to get cheaper, proven medications. The challenge is you want to obviously make sure that there's some quality assurance mechanism in those countries that you're getting a good medication.
Yeah.
For those, I don't have many qualms about a person doing that. My issue is where people will go overseas to get an unproven treatment for a condition, whether it be cancer or any other condition. That's a situation where I think that we need to advise patients better, and that they may be being taken advantage of.
And one more thing, stem cells. I think you could have a fleet of jets going back and forth to Mexico on stem cell therapy for people. I know a number of people who do that, and they swear by it. What do you think?
Well, again, this goes back to that original discussion that we were just having a little bit ago about when it's proven to work, then it's something that we will recommend.
Okay.
And in this situation, and for many of the indications that people are using stem cell therapies for, it has not been proven to work. And so there's a reason why people are paying out of pocket for these things and traveling overseas to get them. And it's because they're being used for indications where they've not been proven to work.
Dr. Skyler Johnson, once again, oh my goodness, I need to have you on here every week to talk about this stuff. Very interesting.
Love chatting with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. Thanks for joining us today. Just put out this paper. Remember his last name, Johnson. So when you go in there and look for papers and stuff, put in Johnson, and then you'll get there. Congratulations on your study. And as this crazy world of artificial intelligence and cancer research keeps winding up, I'd like to ask you to come back and get your take on everything. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.